Picture the greatest military empire in human history, an empire that spans a quarter of the globe, that has fought wars in every climate imaginable, from the frozen heights of the Himalayas to the dust of the Crimean Peninsula, from the fever swamps of West Africa to the burning plains of India. An empire that produces more medals, more battle honours, more regimental flags thick with embroidered victory than any nation in history. Now picture what happens to the men who won those medals when the war is over. Not what you imagine, not what the paintings show you, not the triumphant return, the cheering crowd, the grateful nation pressing coins into calloused hands. Not that. Picture a man standing in the rain outside a government office in Whitehall on a Tuesday morning in November 1862. He's been there since 7 o'clock. It is now 9:30. The clerk inside, visible through the small frosted window, has been sitting at his desk the entire time, drinking tea, reading what appears to be a newspaper, occasionally glancing up at the queue outside with the expression of a man being mildly inconvenienced. The man in the rain is 34 years old. He has a sergeant's bearing even now, even here. Shoulders back, chin level, eyes fixed on a middle distance that isn't quite the grey London sky and isn't quite anywhere else. In his left hand he holds a folded paper protected by his coat from the rain. In his right hand a crutch. The crutch goes under his arm. His right trouser leg is pinned up below the knee. He has been standing in the rain on one leg since 7 o'clock. His name is Thomas Brennan, and tonight you are him. I make these sleep histories, and honestly I have no real idea whether any of you are actually sleeping to the sound of my voice, or whether you are all just quietly furious people who enjoy hearing about Victorian bureaucracy at midnight. Either way, get comfortable. Turn down the light if you haven't already. Let the city outside do whatever it's doing. Here we go. Your eyes open in the dark. For a moment, the half-second between sleep and waking, you're somewhere else. Somewhere warm. Not this cot, not this room, not this particular smell. You're in the barracks at Aldershot, maybe, with 20 men breathing around you in the dark. Or you're in the tent at Balaclava before the winter set in, when the worst thing about sleeping was that the ground was hard and the blankets smelled of horse. Then the pain comes back, and you know exactly where you are. Not the pain in your leg, the other pain, the one lower down. The phantom pain, the doctors call it, which is a fancy way of saying your body hasn't been informed yet that the foot it's sending distress signals from no longer exists. Your right foot, which was left on the Crimean Peninsula 8 years ago, is currently on fire. It is freezing cold and burning at the same time, which is physically impossible, and also happens to be your first experience every single morning. You lie there and breathe through it. You've learned to breathe through it. The room around you assembles itself through the dark. The Doss House on Mint Street, Southwark, which charges 4p a night for a cot and the privilege of sleeping in a room with 11 other men. The smell assembles itself at the same time because the smell in this room is not something you can ignore or defer. It's immediate. It's present. It demands acknowledgement. Unwashed bodies. First, that's the bass note. 11 men who work physical jobs, or who have worked physical jobs, or who used to work physical jobs sleeping in an unventilated room. Their accumulated sweat has been absorbed into the wooden walls over years and decades, until the wood itself seems to breathe it out. Then pipe tobacco, the cheap kind, the stuff that smells more like burning rope than anything you'd actually want to smoke. The man in the cot 2 down from you smokes even in his sleep somehow, or at least he smokes right up until the moment he's asleep and again the moment he wakes, and the residue of it saturates everything in his radius. Mildew. The window frame is rotting slowly, and where the wood has gone soft, the mildew has taken hold. The particular grey-green variety that smells like wet earth and cold cellars and things left too long in the dark. And underneath all of it, under everything, the smell of the street outside. Because Mint Street in Southwark in 1862 smells of what Mint Street in Southwark in 1862 is, which is a working-class street in the poorest borough of the largest city in the world. And what that means in practical terms is horse manure, coal smoke, river mud, and the particular stench of the tanneries 2 streets over that works leather by soaking it in vats of, among other things, dog excrement. Welcome to London, November 1862. You swing yourself upright on the cot. This is a practiced movement, something you've been doing for 8 years now, and like all practiced movements, it has its own economy. Left leg down to the floor first, weight forward onto the left, left hand on the wall, right hand finding the crutch where you've left it leaning against the frame. Up, standing. The wooden floor is cold under your bare foot, cold enough to feel through the thick callus on your left heel, which is substantial because your left foot does the work of 2 feet now and has the wear to show for it. Your stump is sore. It's always sore in the mornings, before the prosthetic leg goes on, because the socket was made 18 months ago by a man in Cheapside who did his best with the measurements, but whose best has always been imprecise, and the imprecision rubs, and the rubbing has produced a callus of its own over the years. But the callus is on soft tissue, and soft tissue doesn't callus the way a heel does. And so every morning when you put the leg on, it takes approximately 40 minutes before the pain settles into something manageable. The prosthetic leg is leaning against the wall next to the crutch. You reach for it in the dark by memory. Wood and leather and a brass joint at the ankle that doesn't quite articulate the way an ankle should, and a leather cup at the top that fits over the stump of your right leg and is held in place by a leather strap that goes around your thigh. The strap has rubbed the inside of your thigh raw, in a stripe about 2 inches wide. You've had the stripe for so long it's become part of your geography. You sit back down on the cot. Draw the prosthetic onto the stump. The leather cup is cold, which is its own particular sensation, the cold pressing in against skin that is perpetually tender. You work the stump into the cup, which requires both hands and a degree of twisting that still feels wrong even after 8 years, the way anything feels wrong that shouldn't be necessary. Pull the strap, buckle it, stand up, the leg takes your weight, it always does. That's the one reliable thing about it. Around you in the dark, men are sleeping or pretending to sleep or lying awake the way you were lying awake 30 seconds ago, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the day to start. You can hear the range of them. Deep, slow breathing from the cot nearest the door, where a man who loads coal at Waterloo Bridge Wharf sleeps the sleep of someone who genuinely earns his rest. Irregular, fitful sounds from the cot by the window, someone troubled by dreams or digestion or both. A cough from the corner that doesn't sound well, hasn't sounded well for a week. The wet, rattling kind of cough that in this city in this year means one of several things and none of them good. You pull on your shirt by feel. This shirt is rough cotton that has been washed so many times it has gone thin at the elbows and across the shoulders, and the thinness means the cold gets through it quickly, which is why you put the waistcoat on straight after, and the jacket straight after that, and work the buttons by feel in the dark, because you've been working them by feel in the dark long enough that your fingers know where they're going without needing to be told. Trousers. The right trouser leg is shorter than the left, cut off and hemmed. because a full trouser leg over a prosthetic looks wrong in a way that announces itself, and you've learned, not quickly, but you've learned that the way your disability presents itself in public affects how people treat you, and the manner in which they treat you affects whether you eat. Boots. One boot, technically, though you still reach for the pair out of habit every morning and have to catch yourself. The left boot is good leather, resoled twice, currently held together on the upper by 2 stitches of waxed thread that you put in yourself with a cobbler's needle borrowed from the man downstairs. The right boot you keep because you're not sure why. It's been 8 years. Some habits refuse to accept information. You stand up again, crutch under your right arm, and make your way to the door. The staircase at the Mint Street Doss House has 12 steps, and you know each of them by character. The 3rd step from the top is loose, and catches the end of the crutch if you're not careful. The 7th step creaks in the middle but not at the edge. The bottom step has a rounded edge that you learned about the hard way, 3 weeks after you arrived, when you were still trusting your balance more than you should have. You take them one at a time, left foot down, crutch down, pause, left foot down, crutch down, pause. 12 steps. You're at the bottom. The front room of the Doss House smells of the morning fire, which the landlady's daughter has been building for the past half hour, and of yesterday's soup, which is still in the pot, and which has been yesterday's soup for 3 days now. The soup changes ingredients but retains its fundamental character, which is grey and slightly thick and warm. And at 4p for a bowl, it is an exercise in economics that you engage in every morning with the reluctant arithmetic of a man who has learned to count everything. Your pension is 9p a day. 9p a day is what the army pays a sergeant who has lost a limb in Her Majesty's service. It was set at that rate by a pension board that met in a warm room in Whitehall in 1855 and decided, after careful deliberation, that 9p a day was a reasonable provision for a man who gave his leg to the Crimean campaign. The bed is 4p, the soup is 4p, that is 8p, leaving 1p, which in theory covers everything else. In theory. In practice, it covers nothing else, which is why you have the envelope folded in your jacket pocket, the one with the regimental crest on it, the one that has taken you 3 weeks to compose and 2 weeks to work up the nerve to send, and which produced last Thursday a reply informing you that your request to have your pension reviewed had been received, and that you should present yourself at the offices of the Pension Board at Whitehall on the 12th of November at 9 o'clock in the morning. It is the 12th of November. It is just past 5 in the morning. Whitehall is 1.5 miles from Mint Street, Southwark, across London Bridge, 1.5 miles on one leg and a crutch, in November before breakfast. You eat the soup standing up, leaning against the wall of the front room, while the landlady's daughter, a girl of about 16 named Nan, who has the resigned competence of someone who's been working since she was 8, stirs the pot and doesn't look at you with anything like pity, but also doesn't look at you with anything like curiosity, which is the correct social response, and you appreciate it. The soup tastes of turnip and something that was probably mutton at some point in its history. It's hot, which is the most important thing. The heat of it spreads down your chest and into your stomach, and does the small but significant thing that heat does first thing in the morning, which is remind you that you have a body, and that the body is functional, and that functional is enough to be going on with. You hand Nan back the bowl. She takes it without comment. You put on your cap and take up your crutch, and go out into the street. The air hits you like a wall, not a clean wall. There's nothing clean about London air in November at 5 in the morning. It's coal smoke and cold and damp and the particular thickness that the fog gives everything at this hour. The fog that rolls in off the Thames and settles into the streets and doesn't burn off until mid-morning if it burns off at all. It gets into the back of your throat immediately, the way it always does, and produces the morning cough that every Londoner of this era develops within about 6 months of arrival, regardless of their prior health. A dry, scraping cough that brings up nothing useful, but signals to everyone within earshot that you are indeed alive and breathing, however unwisely. The street is not empty. Southwark streets are never empty, not at any hour. There are men with barrows heading for the market, a woman with a bundle of something that might be washing or might be everything she owns, a dog, thin and purposeful, trotting along the gutter with its nose down, following a scent, 2 boys running, for reasons unknown, with the particular velocity of children who are either chasing something or being chased by something, and you cannot determine which. You start walking. The crutch on wet cobblestones requires a specific technique. The rubber ferrule at the bottom, you replaced the original iron tip 2 years ago after it slipped on wet stone and put you on the ground in front of a crowd of people near Borough Market, which was an experience in humiliation you have no intention of repeating. Grips well enough on flat cobbles, but less well on the rounded ones near the gutters, and not at all on the metal drain covers that appear with annoying regularity in the pavements of this city. You've mapped the drain covers the way a sailor maps rocks. You know where they are on your regular routes, and you step around them automatically, and on new routes you go carefully. Your arms, after 8 years, are the arms of a man who has used them as the primary load-bearing structure of his locomotion. The left arm, which does most of the work, has a forearm that is noticeably thicker than the right, and a shoulder that occasionally aches in weather like this, and a callus on the palm where the crutch grip has compressed the skin for 8 years. You can feel the callus against the smooth wood of the handle. You know its texture the way you know the texture of your own name. London Bridge at 5:15 in the morning. The bridge is never quiet at any hour either, because the bridge is the main crossing for the entire south side of the river, and at 5 in the morning it carries the men and women who are getting to their work before 6, and at midnight it carries the men and women who are leaving their work after 11, and in between it carries everyone else. You've crossed it so many times it has lost its capacity to impress you, which is something you notice occasionally with a mild sense of loss, because London Bridge crossing the Thames at dawn, with the river silver and grey below, and the city emerging out of the fog on both sides, is objectively remarkable. The river is very low this morning. You can smell it, the particular low-tide smell that is mud and salt and something organic and deep. The smell of a tidal river that has been the highway and the sewer of one of the world's great cities for 2,000 years. When the tide is out, the mudlarks will be working the exposed banks, children mostly, picking through the mud for coins and rope and coal and anything else that has fallen from the wharves or been thrown from the bridges. You can sometimes see them from up here, small figures moving slowly through the grey mud, bent over their work, their feet disappearing to the ankle with each step. You've talked to a mudlark once, a boy of maybe 10, face and hands grey with Thames mud, who came up to you on the south bank and asked if you had any bread. You didn't have any bread. He looked at your leg, or at the place where your leg wasn't, with the frank curiosity of a child who hasn't yet learned to pretend he hasn't noticed. "How'd that happen?" he asked. You told him, the war, Crimea, the battle at Inkerman. He nodded, very seriously, as if this confirmed something he had suspected. Then he went back to the mud. You don't know his name. The the north side of the bridge, and now you're in the city. The financial heart of the empire. Except at 5 in the morning, the financial heart of the empire is mostly closed, and what's open is the service infrastructure. The men who clean the counting houses, and the women who sell coffee from hand carts, and the boys who sweep the entrances of the banks and the insurance offices, preparing the stage for the merchants and the clerks who won't appear for another 2 hours. Whitehall is west along the Strand and down past Charing Cross, and as you walk, the city wakes around you in layers. First the workers, the ones who start earliest, moving through the streets with the purposeful economy of people who cannot afford to waste time. Then the market people with their carts and their noise, then gradually the shopkeepers rolling up their shutters and the clerks appearing in their black coats, and the first of the gentlemen, though not many gentlemen are abroad at this hour in November. Your left foot is finding the rhythm of the walk, the 3-point rhythm: foot, crutch, pause, foot, crutch, pause, that covers ground more efficiently than it looks from the outside. You've been told by a number of people that you move quickly for a man on a crutch. You've never found this to be a particularly useful observation. You move at the speed that gets you where you need to go, and that's the entire scope of the project. Your stump, inside the leather cup of the prosthetic, is beginning to do the thing it does after about 10 minutes of walking, which is to generate heat. The heat is partly friction, and partly the natural warmth of the body trapped in the leather, and the heat makes the tenderness worse before it makes it better, which means the first 15 minutes of any walk are the worst, and after that it settles into something you can exist alongside without too much conscious effort. You've thought of it sometimes as a kind of tax, the tax on moving. Everybody pays something to move through the city, and the woman carrying the washing basket pays in her back, and the coal man pays in his lungs, and you pay in your stump, and the payment is non-negotiable, and the taxman doesn't care about your circumstances. You pass Charing Cross as the first thin light is beginning to appear in the sky above the buildings to the east. Not real daylight yet, but the preliminary suggestion of it, the grey lightening that happens before the sun arrives, and in November sometimes passes for daylight on its own, the sun being a gentleman who in November considers a brief appearance and frequently decides against it. Whitehall, the offices of government, the wide street that runs south from Trafalgar Square to Parliament, lined on both sides with the buildings in which the business of empire is transacted in triplicate, on forms that take approximately 6 weeks to process. The pension board office is at number 47. You stand in front of it. It is 7 o'clock. The office opens at 9. There are already 3 men ahead of you in the queue. You look at them and they look at you, and the 4 of you perform the specific social ritual of men who share a condition, which is to acknowledge each other's presence without drawing attention to the condition itself. The man at the front of the queue has an empty sleeve where his left arm should be. The second man is missing 3 fingers on his right hand, which is technically not the same category of injury, but the pension board handles it with the same enthusiastic indifference. The third man, directly ahead of you, has both his legs and both his arms, and nothing externally missing, but he stands with the specific stillness of a man who is managing pain from inside, and when he moves to shift his weight, you see the slight way his face changes that tells you what kind of pain it is. Internal, bowel-wound maybe, or kidney, from shrapnel or bullet that missed the bones and found the soft parts, which is in many respects a worse outcome than missing a limb, because a missing limb is visible, and visible things get acknowledged, and acknowledged things occasionally get treated. A wound you can't see gets called malingering. You nod to the man with the missing fingers. He nods back. That's the conversation. The rain starts at 7:30. It's not dramatic rain. It's London November rain, which is less rainfall and more an atmosphere of moisture that falls without particular commitment. Not heavy enough to justify an umbrella if you have one. Certainly heavy enough to soak through a jacket in about 40 minutes. You don't have an umbrella. You can't use an umbrella with a crutch because an umbrella requires a hand, and your right hand holds the crutch, and your left hand is holding the envelope, and there are no more hands available. The envelope. You should check it isn't getting wet. You put it further inside your jacket against your chest, where the warmth of your body might protect it. The letter inside it is your letter from the board confirming the appointment, and also a letter from your regimental sergeant major from 4 years ago, attesting to your rank and service record and the circumstances of your injury, and also a letter from a doctor who saw you 18 months ago and wrote down the state of your stump in the clinical language that the board requires, and then charged you 2 shillings for the privilege, 2 shillings being approximately 4 days of pension. You stand in the rain, on one leg, holding your papers against your chest for 2 hours. This is the part nobody told you about. Not when you enlisted, obviously. You were 22, and from a village in Lancashire, and the sergeant who came to the village to recruit presented the army as a thing with regular meals and good boots, and the possibility of adventure, all of which were more appealing than the cotton mill where you'd been working since you were 12, and you enlisted with 7 other men from the village, 6 of whom you're still capable of accounting for. William Farrow died of cholera outside Varna before he ever saw a Russian. Robert Cross was shot at the Alma. James Dodd and Samuel Dodd brothers survived the whole campaign without a scratch, which everyone agreed was the result of specific divine intervention, and came home and went back to the mill and are probably still there. Edward Brennan, your own brother, who you're not related to by name coincidentally, also survived but lost most of his hearing in both ears from the artillery at Sebastopol, and now works in a bakery in Preston because the noise of the mill is too much for whatever hearing he has left. And Thomas Garside lost his mind somewhere around the winter of 1854 to 55. Not in any dramatic way, not in a way anyone could point to and say that's when it happened, but gradually over the course of that winter, the way a fire goes out, and came back to England technically alive and technically present, and went to work at his father's farm, and has been sitting in the same chair, looking at the same field for 7 years now, and has not, as far as you know, said anything to anyone that required more than a nod. That leaves you, the one who lost the leg. You lost it at the Battle of Inkerman, which happened on the 5th of November 1854, which means that yesterday, the 4th of November, was the eve of your 8th anniversary of the event, which you did not celebrate, because there is no social apparatus for celebrating the anniversary of the day. Your leg was taken off by a Russian musket ball at close range during an engagement that lasted 6 hours in dense fog and killed over 600 British soldiers, and is largely forgotten by the British public in favour of the much more famous cavalry charge that happened 2 weeks earlier. The cavalry charge everyone knows about. The infantry battle everyone's forgotten. That's fine. That's more or less your experience of the whole enterprise. It's fine. The rain continues. The man with the missing arm at the front of the queue produces a pipe from his coat pocket and lights it with practised one-handed efficiency, which you observe with the appreciation of one specialist for another. Getting fire from a match with one hand is a skill. He's been doing it long enough to make it look effortless. At 9:15, the door to the building opens, and a young man in a clerk's coat looks out at you and at the queue that has grown behind you to approximately 12 men and 3 women, and says, Doors open at 9 and closes the door again. The man with the missing fingers, who's been clenching and unclenching his remaining fingers rhythmically for the past hour in a way that suggests they pain him, says something under his breath that isn't polite. You say nothing. You've been to the pension board twice before. You know how this goes. Patience is not a virtue the board rewards, but impatience is a thing they use against you. Because if you show frustration, they make a note of it, and notes of frustration become evidence of difficult character, and difficult character is one of the many reasons the board finds to deny appeals. You know this because the first time you came here 6 years ago, you showed frustration, and the clerk wrote something in a file, and your appeal was denied, and it took you 2 years of correspondence to get another appointment. Patience. You stand in the rain and you are patient. At 9 o'clock the doors open. Inside, the Whitehall office of the pension board is warm. That is the first thing you register. The warmth, the specific warmth of a coal fire in a room with low ceilings and no drafts, and it is so much warmer than the November street that for a moment it feels almost aggressive, the warmth pressing into the cold that has settled into your bones over the past 2 hours. Your hands ache as they warm. Your stump aches more, not less, as the blood comes back into it. The office is painted grey. Everything in it is grey or brown or black. The walls and the ceiling and the wooden floors and the wooden furniture and the coats of the clerks at the high desks behind the counter. The counter is a wooden barrier approximately chest height, which divides the supplicants from the administrators, which is a spatial arrangement that says very clearly which side of this transaction has power and which side does not. The clerk behind the counter is young, perhaps 25, with round spectacles and the slightly damp quality of someone who has spent his entire working life in offices and has not been significantly rained on at any point. He takes your letter with 2 fingers, reads it briefly, opens a large ledger, runs his finger down a column of names, and says, without looking up, Brennan, Thomas, former sergeant, 4th Regiment of Foot. That's right. Purpose of today's visit. Pension review. I wrote to request a review of my current rate. The letter I received asked me to attend today. The grounds for the review request. You've rehearsed this. 3 weeks of writing it in your head in the Doss house on Mint Street, lying on the cot in the dark, shaping the sentences, testing them against what you know of how these conversations go. The grounds must be specific. The grounds must be factual. The grounds must not include anything that sounds like self-pity. Because self-pity, in the view of the board, is a character defect that disqualifies a man from consideration. My pension is set at the standard rate for a below-knee amputation, 9 pence per day. That rate was established in 1855. The cost of basic accommodation and food in London has increased since 1855. On the current rate, after paying for a bed and 1 meal per day, I have 1 penny per day remaining for all other expenses. I am unable to maintain my health or my appearance on the current rate. My inability to maintain my appearance limits my ability to seek employment, which would otherwise supplement the pension. The clerk writes something. He writes it slowly, with the precision of a man who is paid to write precisely, and you watch his pen move and try to read the words upside down, and can make out approximately half of them, which is more than you'd prefer, but less than you need. You are currently seeking employment? I am, yes. This is technically true. You have applied for 3 positions in the past month. A position as a doorman at a hotel in the Strand, which required you to stand for long periods, which the leg makes complicated but not impossible. A position as a bookkeeper at a merchant's office near the Exchange, for which you have the literacy and the numeracy which you acquired in the army, where they found sergeants were more useful if they could read and write, and a position as a night watchman at a warehouse near the river, which you thought was the most likely of the three, because night watchmen are not required to look presentable. None of them wrote back. Do you have documentation of your employment-seeking activities? I have copies of my letters of application. You'll need to submit those. You open your jacket and find the papers. They're slightly damp at the edges from the rain, but legible. You put them on the counter. The clerk takes them with 2 fingers, reads them. Something about his face shifts slightly, reading the 3rd one. The watchman application. He puts them down and writes something else. You were a sergeant. Yes. 8 years service prior to your discharge. 12 years. He looks up for the first time. He has the expression of a man doing arithmetic, and the arithmetic is inconvenient. 12 years. I enlisted in 1842. I was discharged in 1855 following the amputation. 12 years. He writes something. Then he says, still writing, your application for review will be considered by the board at the next meeting. That's the 2nd Thursday of December. That's 4 weeks. Yes. I understand. Thank you. You take the receipt he gives you and fold it carefully and put it next to the letters inside your jacket. The clerk has already moved on to the next person in the queue, the man with the missing fingers, and you step aside and make your way back across the grey room to the door. Outside, the rain hasn't stopped. You stand on the step for a moment and let your shoulders down from where they've been, up near your ears, for the past 2 hours. Let the breath out slowly. December. 4 weeks. 4 weeks at 9p a day is 2 shillings and 6p, which is what this appointment has cost you in waiting time, in terms of the employment hours you could have spent. Except you don't currently have employment hours, so the calculation is different. 12 years of service, and the government will consider reviewing your rate of pension in 4 weeks. That's fine. That is how it works. You start walking. You have nowhere specific to be, which is an unusual condition after the structured purposefulness of the past several hours, and your body isn't entirely sure what to do with it. The crutch finds the rhythm. Left foot, crutch, pause. Left foot, crutch, pause. Whitehall to the Strand, north side of the river, which means you are currently about as far from Mint Street as it's possible to be, while still on the same island. You think about going back across the bridge, getting the soup, sitting on the cot in the room that smells of 12 men and mildew, and thinking about December. You could do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Instead, you walk west, along the embankment toward Chelsea. The Thames is on your left. At this hour, in this light, with the fog still clinging to the water, it is genuinely beautiful, which is an objectively strange thing to say about a river that is also a sewage canal for 3 million people. But here you are. The grey water, the grey sky, the shapes of the boats, the far bank with its trees, and the suggestion of open country behind. It is quiet here relatively, the noise of the city muffled by the fog. The smell is the river smell, which is not a good smell, but it is at least an honest one. The river doesn't pretend. Your left shoulder is beginning to talk to you. The crutch, over distance, communicates up through your palm and wrist and forearm and into the shoulder joint, and the shoulder joint, which has been absorbing this communication for 8 years, has developed its own opinions about it. Specifically, it objects on damp November days when you've been standing in the rain for 2 hours before you started. You adjust your grip on the handle, which shifts the pressure by approximately enough. You pass the gardens at Embankment, not open yet at this hour, and the buildings going up nearby, the new ones, the ones that the new London is building on both sides of the river in a burst of Victorian confidence that produces large quantities of scaffolding and large quantities of noise and eventually large quantities of stone buildings that will stand for another century at least. London is being rebuilt around you, has been being rebuilt since you came back from Crimea. The cholera outbreak showed them what the old city was, and they have been trying to replace it ever since. You'll give it to Bazalgette, the engineer. The new sewers. He's building the sewers under the whole city, the massive brick tunnels that will take the waste from 3 million people and carry it downstream and away. And when they're finished, the river will stop smelling the way it currently smells, and the cholera will stop doing what the cholera currently does. That's the theory. You don't know if it'll work. But the sewers themselves, the ones already built, the ones you've walked past being constructed, are extraordinary things. Enormous arched tunnels of brick that go under the streets like cathedrals going underground. And the ambition of them is, you think, genuinely impressive. The ambition of rebuilding the sewers of the largest city in the world. The ambition of standing in the rain at 7 a.m. to ask a clerk to reconsider a penny of your daily income. Both of these things are happening in the same city in the same year, and you're connected to both of them, and neither of them knows the other exists. Chelsea, after another 40 minutes, the city changing around you as you walk. The working-class streets of Suffolk long behind you. The government buildings of Whitehall also behind you. The slightly more affluent character of Chelsea beginning to assert itself in the quality of the buildings and the width of the pavements and the general cleanliness of the gutters. Chelsea has trees. The trees in November are bare naturally, but they are there, and their presence indicates the kind of street where the people who live here have enough political weight to insist on trees. There is a large building here. 2 large buildings actually facing each other across a courtyard that could swallow the whole of Mint Street. Red brick, which is unusual in a London that tends toward grey stone. Red brick that has mellowed over the century and a half since it was built into something closer to terracotta than red. Warm in colour even on grey days. Colonnades. Domes. Not the scale of St. Paul's, but substantial enough to register against the sky. Formal gardens that in summer would be remarkable, and in November are extremely well kept, bare grass and gravel paths. The Royal Hospital, Chelsea. Home for approximately 556 pensioner veterans of the British Army. Currently. You know the number because you looked it up. You know a great many things about this building because you looked them up during the long evenings on the cot at Mint Street when the alternative was lying in the dark with the phantom foot burning. The hospital was built by Charles II in 1682, designed by Christopher Wren, who was at the time also building St. Paul's, which explains why the proportions have the same quality of absolute confidence. The idea was the same as the one the French had already acted on, the Hôtel des Invalides in Paris, which opened 15 years earlier and which apparently annoyed the English enough to do something about it. A home for old soldiers, for the ones who can't work anymore, for the ones who served and were used up and have nowhere else to go. Admission requirements. Must have served at least 20 years. Or be declared unfit for service due to wounds or sickness. Must be of good character, as certified by an officer. Must be judged to require the charity of the Crown by a board of inquiry. 20 years or unfit for service. You served 12 years. You are unfit for service. Both conditions would seem to satisfy at least 1/2 of the stated criteria. You have applied twice denied. The first time, the grounds were that your character certification was from a non-commissioned officer, rather than a commissioned one, your sergeant major rather than a captain or above. The form states clearly that the certification must be from a commissioned officer, but your company commander, Captain Hartley, died of typhoid outside Sebastopol, and the next officer above you, Lieutenant Forsyth, lost both his legs to the same cannon shot that took yours, and the address you had for him proved to be wrong when you wrote. The second time, the grounds were that your record showed a single disciplinary charge from 1848, when you were 20 years old and spent 3 days in the cells for drunken conduct in barracks. One incident, 14 years ago, at the age of 20. The board considered this evidence of a deficiency of character. You're currently preparing your third application. The gates of the Royal Hospital are open. They're always open during daylight hours. The pensioners who live here, the in-pensioners as they're called, wear a distinctive uniform of dark blue coats and tricorn hats. An 18th century uniform kept deliberately because the men who wear it take a specific pride in it, and they walk in the grounds and sit on benches in good weather and can be seen from the street, visible evidence that the country takes care of its veterans. The visible ones, the men inside the building, the 556 inside, and the men outside. You don't know how many of those there are. Nobody counts the ones outside, but you walk these streets. You know the faces under London Bridge on the south side where the men sleep in the arches. You know the faces in the soup kitchens in Whitechapel and the doss houses in Southwark and the workhouses everywhere. Not all of them soldiers, not even most of them, but enough of them. Enough men with the specific posture, the specific stillness, the specific way of standing in a public place without being seen that you learn in the army and apparently never entirely unlearn. You stand at the gate of the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, in the fog and the rain. A pensioner, one of the in-pensioners in his blue coat, is walking a slow circuit of the courtyard with his hands behind his back. He is old, very old, 65 at least, with a white moustache of the kind that had been fashionable 40 years ago, and appears to have been maintained by stubbornness alone. He sees you at the gate. He stops his circuit and looks at you for a moment, and then he walks over. "Morning," he says. He has the accent of the south, Kent or Sussex. "Morning." He looks at your crutch and your trouser leg, the pinned one. Not with pity, with the assessment of a professional evaluating something he understands. "Which regiment?" "4th Foot." "Crimea?" "Inkerman," he nods slowly, the kind of nod that contains information. "5th of November," he says. "Yes." "I was at the Alma," he says. "September, before your show." He looks at the gate and at you, standing on the outside of it. Waiting for someone? No, just looking. He looks at you again. He has the bright eyes of a man who's been watching people his whole life, and whose internal model of them is largely accurate. How many applications? 2, third in progress. He makes a sound that isn't quite a word, but communicates clearly. He reaches into his coat pocket and produces a small card slightly worn at the edges. He holds it out. "Ask for Major Townley when you apply again. He's on the board for next year. He's a fair man." A pause. "Tell him Sergeant Major Calder sent you. Edmund Calder." He holds out his hand. You shake it. His grip is strong for his age. "Tom Brennan," you say. "Brennan." He says it as if recording it. "Good luck, Brennan." He turns and resumes his circuit of the courtyard. You put the card in your pocket carefully next to the receipt from the pension board and the letters from your failed employment applications. A small card. Sergeant Major Calder's card. It's not nothing. You stand at the gate for another moment, looking at the courtyard, the bare trees and the gravel paths and the red brick buildings, and the old man in his blue coat making a slow circuit. Then you turn back to the city. You're hungry. The soup from this morning has fully metabolized, which in practical terms means your stomach has been providing a continuous low-grade commentary for the past hour, and the smell of a pie shop that you pass 3 streets from the hospital is of the variety that makes negotiating with your stomach significantly harder. The pie shop window has a sign that says mutton pies, 1 penny, which is, as it happens, almost exactly what you have. You have in your coat pocket 2 pennies and 3 halfpennies, which is what's left of yesterday's pension after the bed and the soup this morning. Today's pension won't be collected until you get back to the post office near Mint Street, because the arrangement by which army pensions are paid requires you to present yourself in person at a designated post office with your documents, which is a system clearly designed by people who did not think carefully about the practical challenges facing men who live in different parts of London from their designated post office. 1 penny then. You go into the pie shop. The warmth is immediate and it smells of rendered fat and pastry crust, and the unmistakable protein richness of meat in gravy. The pie shop is small, 4 tables, a counter at the back, a woman behind the counter of approximately 50, with the forearms of someone who's been rolling pastry since adolescence, which she probably has. Mutton pie, you say. She takes your penny, produces a pie wrapped in a piece of newspaper. The pie is hot enough to hurt your fingers through the newspaper, which is a good sign because a hot pie is a fresh pie. And in this city, fresh means something. You eat it standing up in the corner of the shop, not taking a table, because you'd need to order something else if you sit and you can't afford something else. The mutton is mostly mutton, which is better than it sounds, given that this is a penny pie shop in London where the definition of mutton can be flexible. The gravy is thick and slightly too salty, and the pastry has gone slightly soft on the bottom from the steam, but the whole thing is warm and filling, and for approximately 8 minutes your stomach stops providing commentary, and you stand in the warm shop and exist without any particular requirement being placed on you. After the pie you walk back east, along the river, slower now because the morning's walking is in your arms and your shoulder, and there's no point pretending otherwise. The stump has settled into its working pain, the dull, specific ache that you've categorized over years into 4 grades. The one that's nothing, the one that's there but manageable, the one that requires conscious management, and the one that stops everything. You're currently at grade 2, approaching grade 3, which is the morning 1.5 miles to Whitehall and the 2 hours standing and the 2 miles west to Chelsea, beginning to make themselves known in accumulated arithmetic. You've thought sometimes about what the leg would have cost if you'd paid for it yourself. The prosthetic leg. The man in Cheapside who made it charged the army 12 shillings when the army was paying for veterans' prosthetics, which was for a brief period in 1857, a thing the army was doing before it stopped doing it. 12 shillings for a leg. For context, a good pair of boots cost 4 shillings. A month's rent on the Mint Street cot cost about 10 shillings. A competent craftsman making furniture earns about 15 shillings a week. 12 shillings for a leg, and the leg is not quite right, has never been quite right, and the man who made it is presumably still in Cheapside making more legs. Not better legs necessarily, just more of them, because the demand in this decade is substantial, and the incentive to improve is limited because 12 shillings is 12 shillings regardless of quality. An American man named James Hanger lost his leg in the American Civil War 3 years ago, you've read, and has since built himself a replacement of significantly improved design. People are working on this. You've seen the advertisements in the newspapers. the ones that present mechanical limbs of increasing sophistication to an increasingly prosperous class of disabled veterans who can afford the 30 or 40 shillings for the premium version. You cannot afford the premium version. You have 1 penny in your pocket after a pie. You stop on the embankment and look at the river. The fog is lifting slightly. You can see across to the south bank to Lambeth, the palace, and the gardens, and the tanneries, and the brewery. A barge is coming upstream, heavily laden, the horse on the towpath straining against the weight. The bargeman stands at the back, almost motionless, his weight on the tiller, his expression that of a man who has made peace with his particular form of repetitive existence. You think about Inkerman, not deliberately, not because this is a good time to think about it. You think about it sometimes because you're near the river, and the river at certain times in certain lights has the particular grey quality of the Crimean fog, the fog that came off the sea on the morning of the 5th of November and sat in the ravines and the gullies and turned the battle into something happening in all directions at once. A battle with no lines, no clear front, no obvious direction to face, just Russian soldiers emerging out of the fog at close range, and British soldiers emerging out of the fog from the other direction, and everyone killing each other in the confused intimacy of a fight that nobody had planned, and nobody was certain they were winning until it was over. You remember the cold first. The cold before the fighting started, standing at the picket in the dark, the cold that comes off the Black Sea in November and the cold that comes off the Russian steppe behind it, the cold that is the bone-deep kind that you don't experience in Lancashire even in winter, the cold that makes your hands stop working properly, so that when the Russian column came out of the fog at 6:30 in the morning and your men opened fire, you could feel the trigger but couldn't be sure of your control of it, and the man next to you, Corporal Hicks, was firing and reloading and firing, and you were doing the same, working by training rather than thought. You remember the faces. The Russians at close range, so close that you could see individual expressions, and the individual expressions were not the expressions of enemies, which is to say they were just the expressions of men who are frightened and who are fighting, which are the expressions of all men who are frightened and fighting in all wars in all times, and the universality of it was something you noticed even then, in the middle of it, even while you were doing the things you were doing. You remember the moment your leg stopped being your leg. Not the pain first, that came after. First, a simple wrongness, a not rightness, a communication from the leg to the brain that said something has happened, and the something was large and fundamental. Then the ground, faster than expected. Then Hicks's face above you, the expression on it very specific, the expression of a man who is looking at something he would prefer not to be looking at. Then the pain. You don't think about the pain in much detail. It's available if you want it. The memory is intact and specific, but you've made a decision about it, which is the decision most men make about the worst things that have happened to them, which is that you visit it occasionally and briefly, and then you put it back. What you think about instead is what happened after, which is to say, the hospital, the transport, the weeks in the military hospital at Scutari, which was Florence Nightingale's domain by that point, and which had improved significantly from the descriptions of it in the early months of the campaign, improved to the point where the death rate from infection in the wards had come down from something extraordinary to something merely very high. You were there for 6 weeks. The nurses changed the dressings. The surgeon who performed the amputation was competent, which is to say you didn't get sepsis, which in 1854 was genuinely not guaranteed. You came home on a transport ship to Portsmouth and then by road and rail to London, and then by the system of paperwork and boards and offices and letters that constitutes the army's process for disposing of its human expenditure, and at the end of it you were discharged with your pension set, your back pay paid out, and a new prosthetic leg that didn't fit correctly. That was 8 years ago. You've built a life of sorts. Lodgings, pension, knowledge of the city, a set of skills from 12 years of army service, literacy, numeracy, basic carpentry from the engineers, basic medical knowledge from the field that have found occasional employment. A few months as a clerk at a shipping firm in 1858 before the clerk with all his limbs came back from illness, and you were no longer needed. A few months helping to build the embankment works in 1861, carrying materials, which paid well but ended when the wet weather made the site too slippery for the crutch, and you fell twice, and the foreman, who was a decent man but a practical one, said he couldn't have a man who fell twice on a construction site, 9p a day. The river in front of you and the city behind you and the fog slowly lifting and the day still going, still plenty of day left to go. You push yourself off the wall you've been leaning against and start walking again. There's a reading room in Southwark near the workhouse that has newspapers and is free to enter. You go there sometimes on the long afternoons when the weather is too bad for the parks, and the alternative is the doss house room with the cot and the mildew. The reading room is run by a charitable society of the kind that Victorian London produces in large quantities, the kind composed largely of middle-class women who have decided that the solution to poverty is literacy, and are pursuing this theory with considerable energy. The room has 3 long tables and a fireplace and a selection of newspapers that are 2 days old by the time they arrive, and occasionally a small library of improving literature, and it is warm and dry and nobody looks at you with either pity or professional assessment. You go to the reading room. The newspapers today are the Times and the Illustrated London News, and a local paper you don't recognise. The Times is already occupied by a man in his 60s, who appears to have been reading it since it arrived, and has no intention of surrendering any section of it. You take the Illustrated London News, which is a picture paper primarily but has text in between the pictures, and sit at the far end of the table near the fire. The fire is excellent. Good coal, properly banked, throwing a heat that reaches the end of the table where you're sitting. Your hands, which have been cold since this morning, begin to warm, and with the warming comes the ache that warmth brings after cold. The specific ache in the knuckles and the palms and the finger joints that you've been told is the early signature of the rheumatism that affects men who've been wet and cold for years. The Illustrated London News has, this week, a picture of a military parade. The review of troops at Hyde Park, apparently. Some ceremonial occasion whose name you don't register. The picture shows soldiers in dress uniform, perfect lines, the precision of men who have drilled the movement until it exists below thought. You look at the faces in the illustration, the stylized faces that illustrators give to soldiers, handsome and serious and absolutely lacking in the expression of men who've been standing in formation for 3 hours in November. You were good at the parade drill. You were good at most of the formal military things because you had the temperament for precision, the patience for repetition, the attention to detail that made you a good sergeant, which is what you became at 25 after 3 years as a private and 2 as a corporal. Sergeant meant leading men, which meant knowing where each one was at all times, and what each one was capable of, and how to get the maximum from each capability in the various circumstances that the army placed you in. You were good at it. You are aware, in the particular way that you are aware of things that are true but unprofitable to dwell on, that you're still good at the relevant mental skills, the assessment, the planning, the resource allocation. They don't disappear because the leg does. They're in the part of you that thinks and organises, not in the part that walks. The part that thinks and organises is, in the current economic environment, worth approximately 9p a day. A woman comes in who you've seen here before, a regular, maybe 40 years old, who reads the local newspapers with the focused attention of someone searching for something specific. She sits at the other end of the table and you nod and she nods and the reading room maintains its productive silence. You read an article about the new sewers, Basil Getz sewers. The article is enthusiastic in the way of all articles about engineering projects in this period, marshalling statistics with the satisfaction of men who have recently discovered the importance of statistics. But underneath the statistics is something genuinely interesting, which is the description of the construction itself, the excavations, the bricklaying, the pumping stations that will push the waste east and away, the size of the project, the ambition. You think about the men who will build it, are building it, who are moving earth and laying brick and pumping water out of the excavations in the November cold, the men who do the physical work that produces the things that other men put their names on. You've worked with those men for brief periods. They're mostly uncomplicated in their relationship with physical work, which is to say they are accustomed to doing it and not inclined to interpret it symbolically. They work, they get paid, they go home. The sewers will be built and will work, and London will stop smelling the way it currently smells, and the men who built it will be largely unnamed, because that is how it works. You read for a couple of hours. Then you go to the post office near Mint Street and collect today's pension. 9p, 1 tuppence and 1/2 tuppence and 4 pennies and a halfpenny, in coins that are worn to smoothness in some places, the faces of queens and kings rubbed to suggestions of themselves by the passage through 1,000 hands. You put them in your pocket. You've started a letter to Lieutenant Forsyth again. The third attempt. You found an address for him through the regimental society. There is a society for the 4th foot, as there are societies for most regiments, composed of veterans and their families and occasionally officers, which meets annually and publishes a small newsletter and maintains a register of its known members. You wrote to the society 3 months ago, and they replied last week with an address in Edinburgh, which is where Forsyth apparently lives now, which means a letter will take 2 days, and his reply will take 2 days, and the whole correspondence will take time, but the address is good and the request is simple, a character reference for the Chelsea Hospital application. Simple, except that you haven't actually written the letter yet, because the act of writing it requires asking for something, and asking for something requires a specific quality of humility that you find, in practice, harder to achieve than it sounds in theory. You've been a sergeant. Your entire professional life was built on competence, on being the person who solved problems rather than the person who required assistance. You were not wrong to be proud of that, and here you are, writing to a man you knew briefly in another life to ask him to tell a board of governors that you are of good character, so that you can sleep in a warm room instead of a doss house. You will write the letter tonight. You go back to the Mint Street doss house. Nan lets you in. The room is empty of other residents at this hour, the men all out at their various occupations, and the solitude is unusual enough to register as something. You sit on the cot, take out the card that the Sergeant Major Calder gave you this morning at the Chelsea gate. Edmund Calder, Major Townley. 2 names. Names are not nothing. In this city, in this system, names are the threads you pull to move things that otherwise don't move. You sit in the empty room and listen to the sounds of Mint Street coming through the window, a cart, a child, the distant factory noise from across the river, the particular grey weight of November afternoon. Your stump is at grade 3 now. You take the prosthetic off, which is the relief that it always is, the relief of the cup coming free from the stump, the air on the skin, the almost instantaneous improvement in the grade of the pain from 3 back toward 2. You keep the prosthetic on a long peg you've nailed to the wall beside the cot, which means when you need it in the middle of the night it's reachable without getting up. You lie back on the cot. The ceiling has a water stain in the shape of, depending on how you look at it, either a map of a country you don't recognise or a running dog with no back legs, which is a visual coincidence you noticed in your first week and which you've come to regard as companionable. You sleep. Not deeply, not the sleep of a man at rest, but the shallow, useful sleep of a man who knows he has more to do and has given his body 30 minutes to prepare for it. The army trained you to sleep in all conditions and for various durations, and you have not lost this skill. When you wake, 40 minutes later by the sounds of the street, you're groggy for a moment and then not. You put the leg back on. You take the 2 sheets of paper you have, 2 sheets, which is what's left of the writing paper you bought 3 weeks ago, bought for the letter to the pension board which required 5 drafts, and you sit on the cot and you write to Lieutenant Forsyth. You write slowly because you want the words right. The army taught you literacy of the functional kind, reading orders and writing reports. But the kind of letter you're writing now is different. It requires a different register, a language of request that isn't the language of command or of report. You draft it in your head first, the way you draft everything. Dear Lieutenant Forsyth, I hope this letter finds you well. You may not remember me. I served under your command at Inkerman in November of 1854 as Sergeant Brennan of the 4th Foot. I was discharged in 1855 following the amputation of my right leg, with which I believe you are familiar as the same engagement in which you received your own injuries. I am writing to ask a favour, which I do not do lightly, and for which I am sorry to presume on our acquaintance. I am making application to the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, and require a character certificate from a commissioned officer. My company commander, Captain Hartley, died in the campaign. I am not aware of the present address of any other commissioned officer of our company except yourself. If this request is inconvenient or impractical, I entirely understand. If you are willing to provide the certificate, I can send you the form required by the hospital board. I am, sir, with respect, Thomas Brennan, formerly Sergeant, 4th Regiment of Foot. You read it over twice. It says what it needs to say. It asks clearly. It gives him a way out. It doesn't explain the detail of your circumstances, because the detail of your circumstances is not his problem, and men who have to be made to understand your circumstances before they will help you are not men from whom help, when it comes, is easy to receive. You address the envelope, fold the letter in, seal it. Put the receipt from the pension board and the sergeant major's card in the same place, in the inside pocket of your jacket. The room is getting dark. The other residents will be back soon. The coal man and the troubled sleeper and the coughing man in the corner and all the others, back from their days and filling the room with their accumulated human presence. You think about going to eat before they come back, not because their presence is unwelcome, but because the noise level, once the room has all 12 men in it, makes thinking difficult, and you've been thinking all day and you want to be finished with it. But you stay. You sit on the cot and you don't think about anything in particular. and the room gets darker around you. The man who comes in first is the coughing man, earlier than usual, and he looks worse than yesterday, his face the specific grey of a man whose chest is losing the argument it's been having for the past month. He nods at you and sits on his cot and coughs for a while and then lies down, still in his coat, and either sleeps or pretends to. You think, he needs a doctor. You think, a doctor costs money. You think, the workhouse infirmary is free technically, but the workhouse infirmary requires entering the workhouse, and entering the workhouse requires surrendering certain things, among them control of your own time and movement, and men who have been soldiers are specifically ill-adapted to the workhouse, because the workhouse is an institution, and soldiers already know what institutions are like from the inside, and the knowledge makes them resistant. You could suggest it to him. You don't suggest it to him. Not yet. You've been in the DOS house with him for 3 weeks, and you don't know his name and he doesn't know yours, and the social protocol of the DOS house, which is an elaborate etiquette of mutual non-intrusion, doesn't include unsolicited medical advice. But you note it. The evening comes in properly around 6, darkness and cold, and the gas lamps on Mint Street outside throwing their dim orange light through the window, and gradually the men come back, one by one, the room assembling itself through the evening, the noise level rising with each arrival. The coal man, whose name you know is Jack, brings a newspaper, the evening one, which he reads with the focused attention of a barely literate man working harder than his speed would suggest. 2 men you see but don't know play a card game on the floor between the cots. Another man arrives very late and very drunk and gets into his cot with unnecessary sound and falls asleep within minutes. Nan brings up a jug of hot water at 8 o'clock, which is included in the 4pence. You take your ration and wash your face and hands in the basin in the corner. The water is warm for about 3 minutes. You lie down. The ceiling, the running dog, the map of nowhere, the sounds of 11 men preparing for sleep, the various stages of it, settling and shifting, and the one who always reads for 20 minutes by candlelight, and the one who always prays quietly, and the coal man Jack, who is asleep within approximately 40 seconds of his head going down. The deep untroubled sleep of a man who has genuinely used up his day. You think about tomorrow. Tomorrow there are things to do. The post office, to send the letter to Forsyth. The public library on Borough High Street, where you've been trying to read your way through a book on commercial law that you borrowed, with what remaining optimism you have about the bookkeeping position. The library is warm, and the librarian is a thin man who doesn't bother you. You think about the sergeant major at Chelsea, Edmund Calder, the way he looked at you, the assessment of it, the professional recognition. You've thought about what that recognition costs him. The act of noticing you. Because in this city at this time, the act of noticing a crippled veteran begging outside the gates of the institution that won't take him in is an act with an uncomfortable implication, which is that the institution is visible and the men outside it are visible, and the gap between them is visible. And the comfortable thing to do is to not be standing at the gate when the gap is at its most obvious. He stood there anyway. He gave you his card anyway. Some things don't require complicated analysis. You close your eyes. The phantom foot is quiet tonight, relatively. Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, and you've never identified the pattern definitively, though you've noticed it's worse in cold weather and worse after hard walking, and better when you've slept well and better in summer. Tonight the cold of the day and the hard walking should mean it's bad, but it's not. It's at grade 1, the almost nothing. Just a warmth that might be mistaken for a real foot if you were very tired and not paying attention. You're very tired and not quite not paying attention. The sounds of the room settle around you. The coalman snoring. The card players have stopped. Someone coughs. Not the sick man, but a different cough. The ordinary London cough. Outside on Mint Street, footsteps and a distant shout, and then nothing. 6 months later, it is May. This is how time works in a life like this. It doesn't move the way it moves in stories, with events and consequences lined up neatly in order. It moves sideways and in clumps, and sometimes you look up and 3 months have passed and you're not sure what's in them, the days having been too similar to each other to arrange into a meaningful sequence. The distinction between a Tuesday in November and a Friday in February is primarily cold, because both of them involve the same cot, the same soup, the same walk, the same rhythm of the crutch on cobblestone that has become the background music of your existence. But May is different. In May the light comes back and light changes everything. The light in London in May. The particular northern light that comes late and stays long, that turns the grey stone of the buildings golden for a few hours in the evening and makes the river silver instead of pewter. The trees in the parks have leaves again, and the parks have people in them because the air is worth being in, and the entire city seems to have arrived at a collective decision to be somewhat more pleasant for a few months. Your left shoulder is better. The shoulder that took the winter's crutch work and absorbed it and made its objections known. It still talks, but it talks more quietly, Forsyth wrote back. The letter came in January, 2 months after you sent yours. It was short, written in a hand that suggested effort, the uneven letters of a man writing with pain or difficulty or both, and it said yes. It said he remembered Brennan. It said he would be glad to provide the reference. It said he was sorry it had taken so long to reply. He had been unwell. He sent the character certificate 3 weeks after that, signed and witnessed. Colonel Forsyth, it said now, retired, not a lieutenant anymore. The war promoted everyone who survived it. You filed the 3rd application in February. You're currently waiting for the response. May means that you have been waiting 3 months, which is within the stated processing time of 6 to 8 weeks, and yet the processing time has already been exceeded, which means one of two things. Either the application is still being processed, which is the optimistic interpretation, or the application has been denied, and the denial letter is somewhere in the post office system, making its way to you with administrative unhaste. You don't know which. You will find out when you find out. In the meantime, May. There is a particular stretch of afternoon in May in London where the work of the day is done or as done as it's going to be, and the evening hasn't started yet, and the city is warm enough to sit outside. And if you're not currently employed in the conventional sense and have your afternoon free, you can sit on a bench in one of the parks and simply exist in a manner that costs nothing and requires very little. You're sitting on a bench in Southwark Park, which is a new park, opened only a few years ago, built on what was previously waste ground, as part of the ongoing Victorian project of providing London's poor with access to green space on the theory that green space is morally improving. The theory may be right or it may be wrong. You're not qualified to adjudge it. But the park is pleasant, the bench is warm, the horse chestnuts are in bloom and producing the particular extravagant white flower that covers the trees in May like something from a different, warmer country. There are children playing. 2 boys, maybe 7 and 9, chasing each other around the path in a circuit that has been going for 20 minutes and shows no sign of reducing in energy. They pass your bench every circuit, and every circuit the younger one is 3 steps behind the older one, and every circuit he seems surprised by this, newly surprised each time as if the gap has just appeared. An old woman with a basket has stopped nearby and is watching the boys with the expression of someone who has good associations with children, but is glad not to be personally responsible for those ones. A man in a good coat is reading a newspaper on the next bench along. He arrived 20 minutes ago and hasn't looked up from the paper. The horse chestnut above you is doing its improbable flowering. The flowers are enormous, impractical, extravagant in a way that seems excessive for something with no commercial application. Purely decorative. You look at the flowers for a while. You think about the letter, not the Forsyth letter, the Chelsea letter, the one that either exists or doesn't, the one that is either in the post or denied. You think about what you'll do if it's denied. You've been thinking about this periodically for 3 months. The answer changes depending on what day you're having. On the good days, the answer is write again. Find another approach. There are men on the board you haven't appealed to. There are letters of support from other veterans you could obtain. There are politicians who occasionally take up the cause of military pensions as a rhetorical exercise, if not a practical one. And a carefully written letter to the right member of Parliament can occasionally produce results, not because the MP cares, but because caring is periodically useful for MPs. On the less good days, the answer is nothing. 9 pence a day for the rest of your life, which if you're careful and lucky and don't get sick could be 30 more years. 30 more years of 4p lodging and 4p soup and 1p for everything else. On the worst days, which are fewer than they used to be, the answer is, you don't think about it. The boys circle past again. The younger one is now 4 steps behind, having lost ground somehow, and his face has the particular expression of a child who is beginning to understand that effort and outcome are not always correlated. It's not a bad lesson to learn young. Better than learning it at 34. You sit in the park until the light starts to change toward evening. Then you get up and go back to Mint Street. The coughing man is gone. Not gone as in departed for better lodgings. Gone as in his cot is empty and his few things have been removed. And Nan, when you ask, says simply that he went to the workhouse infirmary last week. Whether he went of his own choice or was taken, Nan doesn't say or doesn't know. His name, you learn from the coal man Jack, was William Croft. He was 41. He had worked at the match factory in Whitechapel until his hand started shaking, and the shaking meant he couldn't do the fine work anymore, and without the fine work he had no income, and without income he had the doss house, the match factory. The matches are made from phosphorus paste, which is the reason they light easily, and the phosphorus does something to the jaw of the men and women who make them, gets into the bone somehow, causes a condition that the newspapers have started calling phossy jaw, a particular rot of the jawbone that is excruciatingly painful and occasionally fatal, and is, according to the factory owners, an acceptable occupational risk. You didn't know William Croft's name until he was gone. That's a thing about this city, this life. People arrive and are present and depart, and the knowing of their names is not guaranteed by the proximity of their bodies. A new man takes the cot, younger, 20-something, with a specific restless energy that suggests he's either recently arrived in London or recently lost something, possibly both. He doesn't talk much. He eats quickly, when he eats, and leaves quickly, and comes back late, and in the mornings there is something about his hands when he puts on his coat that speaks of a man who is planning to do something that requires preparation. You don't ask. Not your business. If it were your business, you'd ask. The protocol of the DOS house is the protocol of proximity without intrusion, and you observe it. 3 weeks after May begins, the letter arrives. You see it at the post office before you see what it says, the envelope with the crest of the Royal Hospital, Chelsea. You know that crest. You've memorised it. Red brick buildings in silhouette, the particular domes, the orderly layout of a place that has thought carefully about where things should go. You stand at the post office counter and you open the envelope. You read the letter. You read it again. You're being invited to attend a board interview at the Royal Hospital, Chelsea, on the 14th of June at 10 in the morning. You're requested to bring your military discharge papers, your medical documentation, and this letter. It is not an acceptance. An interview is not an acceptance. But it is not a rejection either. You stand at the post office counter and you read the letter a third time carefully, looking for the conditional clause, the but, the however, the nevertheless, which is the pension board's preferred grammatical structure for communicating disappointment. There is no but, no however, no nevertheless. There is an interview. You fold the letter and put it in your pocket. In the inside pocket with the other papers, the pension board receipt and Calder's card, and Forsyth's reference and the letter of application that took 3 drafts. You say thank you to the woman behind the counter, who didn't do anything in particular to deserve it, but who is the nearest available recipient. You go back out into the May Street. The chestnut tree on the corner is still flowering. It will go on flowering for another week or 2, and then the flowers will drop and the cases will form, the spiked green cases that will produce in autumn the chestnuts that children collect from the pavement, and the cycle will complete and begin again. This is what the chestnut tree does, consistently, regardless of the contents of any letter. You walk June, the 14th of June. Between now and then, 4 weeks, during which you need to prepare. Not the papers. The papers are in order. They've been in order since February. But the other preparation, the one that is harder to quantify, you need to be the right kind of man to walk through that gate. This is not a shallow concern. The board will assess your character through everything they can see. Your bearing, your dress, your speech, the way you answer questions, the way you sit, whether you're the kind of man who can be trusted to live peaceably in an institution and represent that institution with the dignity its reputation requires. You're a man who's been living in a doss house for 18 months. The gap between those 2 things is not small. Your jacket has seen better days. The waistcoat is presentable. The trousers are clean because you are particular about clean trousers. Your boot, is good because you are also particular about the boot. But the jacket is the visible thing, the thing that registers immediately, and the jacket is doing the thing jackets do when they've been worn in all weathers for too long, which is losing the black and becoming a dark grey that suggests defeat rather than deliberate choice. This is a problem with a solution, but the solution costs money. You do the arithmetic. Over the next 4 weeks, at 9 pence per day, you will collect 2 shillings and 3 pence per week, which is 9 shillings total. Less the 4 pence nightly bed, which is 2 shillings and 4 pence per week, which is 9 shillings and 4 pence for the month, which exceeds your income by 4 pence. You look at this arithmetic from several angles. None of the angles produce a different answer. You need to find 4 pence from somewhere, and then some additional amount for the jacket. There is a man in Bermondsey who buys and sells the small things that accumulate in doss houses, the things men arrive with and leave behind or sell when they're desperate. You've sold nothing to him yet, but you know of him because Jack the Coalman has mentioned him, and the young restless man in William Croft's old cot definitely knows him. You've seen the two of them in conversation. You own one good jacket, not good anymore, but formerly good, one waistcoat, two shirts, the trousers, the boot, the prosthetic leg, the crutch, your military discharge papers, 4 letters of reference or documentation, a penknife with a broken point, a copy of a book on commercial law borrowed from the public library that you've been meaning to return for 6 weeks, a brass regimental button from the 4th foot that you found in the pocket of the jacket when you first put it on and kept without knowing why, and the sergeant major's card. Of those things, the penknife, obviously not. The library book you'll return. The jacket might fetch something from the Bermondsey Man, which is a thought so circular it makes you slightly dizzy. The jacket you need to replace being the thing you sell to get money to replace it. But if you sell it and buy something else in better condition, the arithmetic might work. You spend 2 mornings in the second-hand clothing market in Petticoat Lane. Petticoat Lane on a Tuesday morning is a particular kind of London experience, which is to say it is very loud and very crowded and contains approximately everything that has ever been worn by anyone in any condition, arrayed on stalls and hung from hooks and piled in bins, all of it available at prices that begin with negotiation and end somewhere lower. The smell is cotton and wool and human wear and the very faint smell of the naphthalene that some sellers use to keep the moths out, sharp and slightly medicinal. You're looking for a black frock coat, reasonable condition, fit for a formal occasion. Your size is not unusual, broadly speaking, though the left shoulder of any coat needs to accommodate the crutch grip without binding. The first morning produces 3 candidates, all of them wrong in different ways. Too small in the shoulders, or too short in the body, or the black has gone the way your current jacket has gone, the tired grey that reads as defeat. The second morning. The second morning, a stall near the eastern end of the market has a coat that is nearly right. Black, a couple of years old by the cut, worn at the left cuff but the right cuff good, the shoulders correct. The woman running the stall wants 1 shilling and 6pence. You begin the negotiation that you know is going to happen, the one where you counter at 1 shilling, and she expresses offence and you both arrive eventually at 1 shilling and 2pence, which is where you can afford to be if you eat the minimum for the next week, and which is, you think, about where she's willing to sell it. She starts at 1 and 6. You offer 1 and nothing. She looks at you with the expression of a woman who has done this before. "It's good cloth," she says. "Feel the weight." You feel the weight. It is actually good cloth. Whoever originally owned this coat paid well for it. "Good cloth with a worn cuff," you say. "I'll mend the cuff," she says. 1 and 2 mended. She looks at you. You look at her. The morning market is going on around you with its usual energy. 1 and 3 mended and I'll polish the buttons. Done. She takes the coat away to somewhere behind the stall and produces it 15 minutes later with the left cuff mended so well you can only see it if you know where to look, and the buttons polished to a black shine. You give her 1 shilling and 3pence. You have left 3pence for the next 3 days, until the next pension collection. You put the new coat on over your old waistcoat standing there in the middle of Petticoat Lane. The woman behind the stall looks at you critically. She has the eye of a person for whom dress is a professional matter. "Shoulders are a bit wide," she says. "I'll manage." "You will," she says, and goes back to rearranging her stall, and the transaction is complete. 3pence for 3 days, soup twice. Nothing the 3rd day, or soup on credit from Nan, which you can probably arrange if you need to. You wear the coat carefully. The 14th of June is 3 Sundays away. In those 3 Sundays you prepare in the ways you can prepare. You go to the public library and read about the Royal Hospital. You know the history already, but knowing more doesn't hurt. You read about the current governance, the Board of Commissioners, the rules by which the pensioners live. The rules are strict. Lights out at 10, church twice on Sundays, meals in the Great Hall, uniform worn at all times in public. A regimented life. You've lived a regimented life. You're good at it. Better than you'd like to admit. You're actually good at it. Better than the formless days of the DOS house, where the only structure is the financial constraint and the physical routine. You read also for the first time the full text of the pension regulations, the actual legal language of them, which is printed in a booklet you find in the library. You read it with the attention of a man looking for leverage, and the leverage is there, in subsection 14 of the regulations, which states that a pension may be reviewed upward in cases where the pensioner can demonstrate that his current accommodation significantly disadvantages his health. And the word significantly is important because it is the hinge the whole argument swings on. And the DOS house, with its cold and its damp and its chronic respiratory sick, is, you think, a fairly clear example of significantly disadvantageous accommodation for a man with a stump wound that requires dry conditions to stay manageable. You draft the argument in your head, the one you'll use if the pension board appeals again. Evidence, facts, the regulatory language quoted back to them accurately. You can do this. This is the thing you can do. You sleep better these 3 weeks before June than you've slept in months. Not well. Not the sleep of a man without concerns, but better, which is a relative term and also the only term available. The restless young man in William Croft's old cot disappears on a Thursday and doesn't come back. Whatever he was preparing for, he's gone to do it, and you never learned his name either. Jack the coal man gets a promotion of sorts, becomes a senior coal man, which means he now directs the less senior coal men rather than lifting the coal himself, and he comes back from work on Fridays slightly less comprehensively exhausted than previously, and celebrates this by spending an extra halfpenny on his supper. He shows you his pay stub one evening, not to show off, just to share something good, and it's 1 shilling and 4pence a week, which is significantly more than your pension, but not significantly more than what you've earned during the brief periods of employment, and you look at the stub and nod and say, "Well done, Jack," and mean it. Jack says, "You should be earning this easy. You're sharper than me, no offence." You say, "None taken." Jack says, "What's your plan?" You tell him about the Chelsea application, about the interview. He listens with the focused attention he brings to the evening newspaper, which is the attention of a man who understands that information is useful and should be received carefully. Then he nods. "You'll get it," he says. "You're the type." What type is that? He thinks about it. The type that doesn't give up and doesn't complain. They like that. You're not sure how Jack knows what the Chelsea Hospital Board likes, but it's the kindest thing anyone has said to you in some months, and you take it in the spirit it was offered. The 14th of June, you're up at 5, which is nothing unusual except that this morning you take the time, in a way you don't usually take time, to prepare carefully. You've asked Nan for hot water the night before, paid for it, and the extra halfpenny produced a jug that is genuinely hot this morning instead of warm approaching cold. You wash properly, face and neck and hands with the small piece of soap you bought for the occasion, working the soap into a lather and washing with the thoroughness the occasion demands. You shave. You have a razor, bought second-hand, but a good one, a Sheffield blade that holds an edge if you maintain it, which you do. The shave takes 15 minutes by careful light from the window. You nick yourself once, on the chin, because your hand isn't entirely steady this morning, which is a fact about this morning that you're acknowledging without dwelling on. The clean shirt, the good waistcoat, the black coat from Petticoat Lane, the woman's mending invisible unless you look for it, the buttons polished, the trousers, the pinned right leg brushed, the boot polished. You look at yourself in the small mirror above the wash basin. A man, 34, lean now in the way that men who walk everywhere become lean, the face weathered but not haggard, the eye clear. The coat sits well on the shoulders, better than you expected when you bought it. Sergeant Brennan, not Sergeant anymore, just Brennan, Tom Brennan of Mint Street, Southwark. Former Sergeant, 4th Foot. It'll do. Chelsea is 4 miles from Mint Street. You walk at 6 to give yourself plenty of time, because arriving late is the thing that cannot happen, and because arriving early gives you the opportunity to sit somewhere and settle yourself before the interview, and because walking 4 miles takes you, at your pace, approximately 2 hours on a calm day, and today is not entirely calm. But you walk well. The June morning is warm, genuinely warm. The first really warm morning of the year, and the light is the long, low morning light of June in this latitude. The light that makes everything amber at the edges and puts long shadows on the pavements, and makes London look, briefly, like a city someone designed rather than a city that happened by accumulation. The flowers on the horse chestnut have all gone now. The leaves are full and green and large enough to make real shade. The birds doing the full summer repertoire, the sparrows and the starlings that constitute most of London's bird population, and occasionally, above the rooftops, the wheeling shapes of the swifts that have come back from wherever they go in winter. The birds that spend almost their entire lives in the air. The birds that come to ground only to breed and then are gone again. You think about nothing in particular. That's not true. You think about Inkerman slightly, the way you sometimes do when something important is about to happen, the memory surfacing as a reference point, as if reminding you what you've already come through. You were there. You came back. You've been doing this, the 9p a day endurance of it, for 8 years. Whatever happens in the interview, it is not Inkerman. The clerk behind the desk with his ledger and his fountain pen and his official forms is not the column of Russian infantry emerging from the fog. He's just a man. They're just men. You reach Chelsea at 8:05, 2 hours early. You sit in a coffee shop 3 streets from the hospital, on a backless stool at the counter, and spend 2 pennies on a cup of coffee. Real coffee. Not the chicory substitute that passes for coffee in cheaper establishments. Actual roasted ground coffee that is thick and slightly bitter and very hot, and you hold the cup in both hands and feel the heat of it, and drink it slowly and look at the street outside the window. The street outside is a Chelsea street in summer morning, which means it's pleasant, which means it has trees and pavement and people with the general air of people who are not desperate, not entirely, not visibly. A woman with a baby carriage, a boy on a bicycle, one of the new bicycles, the kind with the enormous front wheel, moving through the street with the slightly improbable efficiency of something that looks like it shouldn't work but does. You finish the coffee, you check your papers, the discharge certificate, the medical documentation, the application letter, the invitation to interview, Forsyth's reference, the pension board receipt for what it's worth, Calder's card, all present, all in order. At 9:15 you walk to the hospital, the gate, the courtyard, the red brick and the domes and the gravel paths and the trees. There is a different pensioner doing the morning circuit today. Not colder, a shorter man with a beard. He doesn't look at you. You go to the administrative entrance, which is round to the left of the main gate, and give your name to the orderly at the desk, and the orderly looks at his list and ticks something and says, "Please wait in the room to the right." The room to the right has 4 chairs, a window looking out onto the garden, and a painting of a naval battle on the wall opposite. 2 other men are already waiting. You nod, they nod, nobody speaks. One of them is missing an arm high up at the shoulder. The other has his arms and his legs and the internal stillness again that speaks of the invisible wound. You sit in the 3rd chair, look at the naval battle on the wall. The painting is dramatic in the style of all naval battle paintings. Ships at close range, cannon smoke, tumbling rigging. Someone thought this was an appropriate thing to put in a waiting room for men awaiting assessment by a board. At 10 o'clock an orderly opens the inner door and calls a name. The man with the internal wound goes through. The door closes. 15 minutes, then your name. The boardroom is larger than the waiting room, wood-panelled, warmer, with a long table at which 3 men are sitting. They are all older than you, all in civilian dress, all with the specific posture of men who are accustomed to sitting in judgment. The one in the middle has a white moustache, similar to Calder's, but managed differently, more formal. The one on the left has reading spectacles on the end of his nose and a file open in front of him. The one on the right is looking at you with an expression of neutral assessment. "Sergeant Brennan," the middle one says. "Yes, sir." "Sit down." There's a chair on your side of the table. You sit. The man on the left with the spectacles says, 12 years service, 4th foot. Inkerman 1854, below knee amputation, right leg. "Yes, sir." The middle one says, "You've applied twice before. First application declined on grounds of certification. Second application declined on grounds of character record." "Yes, sir." "You have a disciplinary charge from 1848. Drunken conduct in barracks." "Yes, sir." "1 charge in 12 years. "Yes, sir." He looks at you. The same quality of look that Calder used, the assessment of a professional evaluating something he understands. Different context, same look. "You are a sergeant." "Yes, sir." 12 years, 1 charge, Inkerman. He says it as if he's reading from an internal document. Then he says, "Colonel Forsyth speaks well of you. He says you were one of the best non-commissioned officers in the regiment." "Colonel Forsyth is very generous, sir." "He's not a generous man, generally." The middle one allows something that may be a slight shift of expression. "That's why it's notable." He looks at the man on the left. The man on the left turns a page in the file. "Your current accommodation," the man on the right says, speaking for the first time. "Mint Street, Southwark, a doss house." "Yes, sir." "And your current pension is 9 pence per day?" "Yes, sir." "With an appeal for review pending?" "I attended the review board in November. The decision is expected in December. The month of December has passed without communication." A pause. "I followed up twice. The most recent communication from the pension board indicates the review is still in process." "Still in process," the man on the right says. A silence. The middle one says, "Do you have any questions, Sergeant Brennan?" This is the question you weren't entirely expecting, the one where they give it back to you. You think about it for a moment. Genuinely think. Don't just perform thinking. "What would be expected of me, sir?" "Day to day. I've read the regulations, the formal requirements. I'd like to understand what the life is practically." Another slight shift. The middle one looks at the one on the right. The one on the right says, "Chapel on Sundays, both services. dinner in the Great Hall, uniform for public occasions. You'd be assigned duties appropriate to your capacity. Administrative work, in your case, based on your record. Helping manage correspondence, some bookkeeping, that kind of thing. There's teaching too, if you're interested. Literacy instruction for some of the newer pensioners. Teaching. You hadn't considered that. I'd be interested in that, sir. Good. He makes a note. The uniform will need to be fitted. That usually takes a week or two after admission. The word admission, as if it's already. We'll be in touch with our decision within 2 weeks, the middle one says. You'll receive a letter at your current address. Thank you, sir. You stand, you shake the hands they offer. You walk back through the door, through the waiting room. The man with the missing shoulder is still waiting. And through the administrative entrance and out into the courtyard. The same courtyard. The same red brick and gravel paths and trees. You stand there for a moment. 2 weeks. 2 more weeks of Mint Street and fourpence, and the mildew and the coal man and the phantom foot at night. And then, possibly, after 2 more weeks, something else entirely. You walk home. Not immediately home. You walk through Chelsea and along the embankment. The same embankment you walked in November. The same grey river. Except in June the river is not grey but brown and gleaming. And the air has some of the salt in it that means the tide is coming in. And there are houseboats tied up near the bank with washing lines strung from them, with the domestic washing of whoever lives on the houseboats flapping gently in the river breeze. A man is fishing from the bank. He's not catching anything, but he has the patient expression of a man who isn't here for the catching. You stop and watch him for a while. The fisherman looks up. He has a face so lined it's almost geological. The face of a man who's been outside in all weathers for most of his life. Anything, you ask? Not today. He looks at the river with the equanimity of a man for whom the absence of fish is not a failure but a condition. There's perch in here somewhere. You just have to be patient enough. How long have you been waiting? Today? Since 6? He looks up at the sun, which is past its midpoint. 5 hours, give or take. 5 hours. I have time, you say, without particularly deciding to say it. He looks at you, at the crutch and the leg, with the assessment that you've become so familiar with that you barely register it anymore. Then he reaches into his basket and produces a second line, already baited. Help yourself, he says. Hook it on that bit of root there. You find a spot on the bank, stable ground, where you can sit without using the crutch, and you hook the line over the root and hold the end and watch the river and the afternoon light on it. The fisherman doesn't say anything else for 20 minutes, neither do you. The river goes about its business, which is to say it flows toward the sea, as it has been doing for longer than anyone alive remembers, carrying whatever London puts into it toward the estuary and the open water. After 20 minutes the fisherman says, "You been in today then? The hospital?" "Yes." They say yes. 2 weeks before I know. He nods. He continues watching his line. "My brother's in there," he says. "Went in about 10 years ago. Lose his feet, both of them in India. He's all right in there, happy enough." A pause. "Happier than before anyway." You say, "What was before?" "Begging," the fisherman says, "on the bridge." He says it without judgment, as a fact. "For 2 years, before they took him in. 2 years, and then they took him in, and now he's all right. 2 years on the bridge, and then the hospital, and then all right." "He teach you to fish?" you ask. The fisherman looks at you. Then he laughs. It's a good laugh. "No, I taught him. He was rubbish." The fisherman's line twitches. He watches it. It settles. He was a soldier, didn't have the patience for it. Most soldiers don't. What about you? You look at the line in your hands, the river below, the afternoon light that has shifted since you sat down, the gold coming into it now, the late afternoon gold, the city behind you and the river in front. I'm learning, you say. The fisherman nods. He seems satisfied with this answer. You sit on the bank for another hour. You don't catch anything. Neither does the fisherman. The light goes from gold to the first hints of evening, and you hand the line back and get back on your feet and dust your trousers and tell the fisherman thank you, and he says come back any time, and you go back to the city. On the walk home you pass the coffee shop where you had coffee this morning. The same backless stools, the same counter. The morning crowd is long gone and the afternoon crowd is different. Workers from the local area, a couple of men in conversation, a woman with her shopping basket who is treating herself to something warm before going home. You don't stop. You keep walking. Mint Street in the early evening, the familiar smell of it. Familiar enough now to be almost not smell. The background you've stopped registering except when you've been away from it for long enough to return to it fresh. You go in. Nan is in the front room. She looks at you and at the coat. How'd it go? 2 weeks until I know, she nods. She has the pragmatic responses of someone who has seen many things and knows better than to invest emotionally in outcomes before they're confirmed. Then she says, I'll put something aside from supper. You look like you walked a long way. About 9 miles in total. Sit down then. You sit. She brings you soup, not the 4-penny bowl, but a larger one with bread that's still morning fresh. You eat it at the table in the front room, which is unusual. Normally you eat in the back or on the cot. Nan doesn't explain the table, neither do you. It tastes better at the table. Upstairs, the room, the cot, the ceiling with its water stain, the company of the men who are here or will be here. Jack the coal man will come in at 8. The new man who replaced William Croft's replacement. A quiet Welshman who works at the print works on Borough High Street and smells permanently of ink and paper, a smell that you don't find unpleasant, who comes in late and leaves early, and keeps himself very tidy in a way that is quietly inspiring. 2 weeks. You take off the coat, hang it carefully on the peg, check the cuff where the mending is. Still perfect. The woman at Petticoat Lane did a good job. You lie down on the cot. The phantom foot. Grade 1 today. A warmth. Just a warmth. Outside, Mint Street. June. The sounds of summer rather than the sounds of winter. Lighter, faster, the voices carrying further in the warm air. Somewhere down the street someone is playing a fiddle. A cheerful, simple tune that rises and falls and rises and falls. 2 weeks. 2 more weeks of this. The Mint Street cot. The 4-pence bed and the 4-pence soup. The rhythm of it. The economy of it. The strange, small integrity of a life lived precisely within its means, and then, perhaps, something else. You close your eyes and let the fiddle music come through the window and the sounds of the summer evening with it. The children not yet called in, the men not yet returned from the pub, the city in its June permission of warmth and light, and the particular suspension of the difficult that summer brings even here, even in Southwark, even on the streets that are not gentle streets in the months that are not gentle months. Here, for right now, there is a fiddle. Here, for right now, there is summer. Here, for right now, it is enough. The letter arrived on a Thursday, not 2 weeks later, as the board had specified. 12 days. You counted them, not obsessively, but with the particular attention you give to things that are coming and cannot be hurried. 12 days, and on the 13th morning the letter was at the post office when you went to collect the pension. The same post office. The same woman behind the counter who didn't do anything in particular the day you received the interview invitation, and who also doesn't do anything in particular this morning, just hands you the envelope with the crest on it. The same crest. The red brick domes. You don't open it at the counter this time. You put it in your pocket and walk out into the street and stand in the morning and hold it in your hands for a moment. The street is doing the things the street does at 8 in the morning in June in Suffolk. Purposeful people, carts, the smell of the bakery 2 doors down that starts baking at 4 and has been smelling of bread for 4 hours by now. A cat is sitting on a step watching a pigeon, with the professional focus of something that has calculated the odds and decided they're not in its favour. You open the envelope, you read the letter, you read it again, you stand in the street and read it a third time, and this time you're reading for the details, the practical information, the report date, the 10th of July, 3 weeks away, the instructions about what to bring, the note about the uniform fitting that will happen on arrival, the information about the chapel and the meal times and the duties. Report date, the 10th of July. 3 weeks. You fold the letter and put it in your pocket. The cat on the step has made its decision about the pigeon, which is the decision it makes every time, which is not today but perhaps tomorrow, and it looks away from the pigeon with the affected indifference of something trying not to reveal its interest. You walk, not toward anywhere in particular, just walking, the crutch finding its rhythm, the June morning warm around you, the city going about its business, the enormous, indifferent city that has been your context for 8 years, the city that doesn't know your name or your history or the contents of the letter in your inside pocket, the city that will not register your departure from it any more than it registered your presence in it. The city is not cruel. It's just indifferent in the way that cities are, and the indifference has a weight to it and also a freedom to it, because the same force that makes you invisible makes you free, makes you able to be exactly what you are without the performance required in a village where everyone knows who you were before. In Lancashire, in the village, Tom Brennan was the sergeant who lost his leg, was always the sergeant who lost his leg, will always be the sergeant who lost his leg in the conversations of people who've known you since you were 8 years old and running through the fields behind the mill. In London, you're just a man with a crutch. There are others. You're one of many. You found this, over 8 years, to be both a loss and a liberation, and the balance between the two has shifted as the years have passed. More toward liberation as you've understood it better. You go to the park. Southwark Park in June is the park in its best version of itself. The trees full and the grass green, and the children on the paths, and the old men on the benches, and the couple walking, and the families spread on the grass on the first genuinely warm Thursday of the year. London's particular summer joy that arrives late and is received with disproportionate gratitude. You find a bench in the sun. The sun on your face is warm, real warm, June warm. You tilt your face toward it for a moment like a plant doing the same thing. The simple animal response to warmth after a long winter. 3 weeks. In 3 weeks you will take a bag, your one bag containing everything you own that is worth taking, and you will walk to Chelsea in the morning, and you will go through the gate, and you will not come back to Mint Street in the same way. The cot, Nan and her soup, Jack the coalman's promotions and his pay stubs, the Welsh printer who smells of ink, the water stain on the ceiling, their dog, the map of nowhere, the things you will not miss, the mildew smell, the cold in December, the narrow economics of the fourpence and the fourpence and the 1 pence left over, the things you will miss. This is a harder category than expected. The independence, the freedom to come and go without accounting for yourself to an institution, the park in the morning without a schedule, sitting on a Thames bank with a borrowed fishing line on a June afternoon because you wanted to. In the hospital there are rules. You know the rules. You've read them. You agreed to them implicitly when you applied. The rules are what they are. Chapel, meals, uniform, duties, a structured life, an institutional life. You live 12 years in an institutional life. You're good at it. You know where you are in an institutional life. It's the formless life that has been, in some ways, harder, but still, the independence. You sit on the bench in the sun and you let the warmth do its work, and you think about what you're gaining and what you're giving away, and you come to the conclusion that you've been coming to for 3 years, which is that what you're gaining is not negotiable. A warm room, a dry room, food 3 times a day, a doctor when needed, a community of men who understand each other in the specific way that men who have been through the same things understand each other, without explanation, without translation. What you're giving away, the formlessness, the freedom, the particular solitude of being unknown. It's not nothing what you're giving away. It's also not as much as what you're getting. The summer is generous with its light. It sits on the park and on the people and on the horse-chestnut trees, which are finished with flowers and moving toward their summer fullness, and it asks nothing of you except to be in it. A week before the 10th of July, you go to see Sergeant Major Calder. He's in the courtyard, the same circuit, the same measured pace, the white moustache and the blue coat, and the tricorn hat that has the slightly formal absurdity of an 18th century uniform on a Victorian body. He sees you at the gate. He changes his circuit to bring him closer. "Brennan," he says. "Sir, I wanted to let you know, the 10th of July. He looks at you. "They're taking you in?" "Yes, sir." He's quiet for a moment. Then something happens to his face that is brief and entirely sincere. "Good," he says. "That's good, Brennan." You show him the letter. He reads it, nods, hands it back. "Major Townley's done right," he says. "He'll do right by you." "Thank you, sir, for the card, for the introduction." He waves this away. "I was standing there. You were there." Simple enough. It made a difference. He looks at you with the direct eyes of a man who doesn't accept compliments as a category. "The difference was already there," he says. "I just pointed at it." You shake hands. "I'll see you on the 10th then," he says. "Yes, sir." He returns to his circuit. You stand at the gate a moment longer, watching him. The measured pace. The hands behind his back. The blue coat in the July light. Then you go back to Mint Street and you start packing. There's not much to pack. The good coat carefully folded, the shirts, both of them, the waistcoat, the trousers, the letters and documents in their envelope, the brass button from the 4th foot, the penknife, though its point is broken, the discharge papers, the prosthetic leg, the crutch. That's it, essentially. Everything in a canvas bag that fits over your left shoulder when the crutch is in your right hand. You've carried it this way before. The balance of it on the left shoulder compensating for the weight of the crutch on the right. And you know the technique of it, how to lean slightly to the right to keep the bag from swinging too far. That night, the 9th of July, you lie on the cot at Mint Street for the last time. The room is doing its usual things. The Welsh printer, who's been here for 4 months now, is already asleep in the tidy way he sleeps, flat on his back with his hands at his sides, like a man in a painting. Jack the coal man is not back yet. He goes to the pub on Thursday nights, a regular private ceremony that he has never offered to share and that you have never asked to join. The three other men whose names you know, Thomas, who loads barges, and Sam, who is a hawker of brushes and useful things, and old Davies, who nobody knows what he does but who always pays his fourpence and is always respectful, are variously sleeping or reading or engaged in the dim routine of evening preparation for bed. The ceiling, the water stain, the running dog, or the map of nowhere, depending on how you look at it. You've looked at it for 18 months. It will go on being a map of nowhere or a running dog long after you've gone, because it was here before you arrived and will be here after you leave and is entirely indifferent to your interpretation of it, as ceilings tend to be. You've thought sometimes about what the men who have lain on this cot before you were thinking about while they looked at it. The men before you in this particular spot, in this particular doss house, the long sequential chain of men who needed a bed at fourpence and found this one, where they went after. What became of them? You'll be the first one, as far as you know, to go to Chelsea. The window is open, the July night being warm enough to allow it. The sounds of Mint Street at 11 at night. Footsteps, distant conversation, the particular sound of a city that is asleep but not unconscious, the low continuous breath of 3 million people living and sleeping and dreaming in proximity. The phantom foot is quiet. Grade 0. No pain, just a warmth that is almost comfortable, almost like a real foot resting. You're aware of the city around you in a way you haven't been in months, aware of it the way you were aware of it in the first weeks when everything was strange and enormous and overwhelming. The awareness that comes from knowing you're leaving something. The city suddenly more visible in its imminence of absence. The tanneries somewhere across the river doing their work. The gas lamps outside throwing their orange light through the open window onto the ceiling. The sounds of Mint Street. 18 months, these sounds. Before that, a room in Whitechapel for 2 years. Before that, a room in Bermondsey for 3 years. Before that, a room in Lambeth for the first year after discharge. 8 years, 7 years, 6 years. The years counting backward to a November morning in the Crimea, to a fog and the sound of artillery and a column of men emerging from the grey. You came back from that. You navigated 8 years of this. 9p a day, and a 4p bed, and a penny left over for everything else that a life requires, and a letter to Forsyth that took 3 weeks to write, and produced a reference that produced an interview, that produced a letter that said report on the 10th of July. From there to here, tomorrow morning, the bag over the shoulder, the crutch under the arm, the good coat, the clean shirt, the 1.5 miles or so to Chelsea in the July morning, with the sun coming up over the city and the river catching it. All the familiar streets one more time, the bridge, the embankment, the park, and then the gate, and then the red brick and the gravel paths and the trees in their summer fullness and the men in their blue coats doing their circuits, and Calder among them, and the administrative entrance around to the left where the orderly has your name on a list and checks it and ticks it and says, "Welcome, Sergeant Brennan, welcome." You close your eyes. The sounds of Mint Street do what they do, which is to be present and ordinary and constant. The sound of people living their lives in the vicinity of your life, which is the sound of any city at any time. The low continuous sound of human proximity that you've been going to sleep to for as long as you can remember. Barracks or camp or billet or doss house. Always the sounds of others. You've been part of all of it. The city doesn't know your name, but you have been part of it. The million men and women who have walked London Bridge in every weather. The mudlark children working the grey mud of the Thames in the morning. The fisherman on the embankment bank with his patient line and his perch that might be there tomorrow. The woman at Petticoat Lane who mended the cuff so well you can barely see it. Nan, with her 14-years-old competence and her bowls of soup. Jack the coal man with his pay stub and his Thursday pub. William Croft, whose name you learned after he was gone. The sergeant major walking his circuits in the blue coat. All of them part of the same enormous ordinary miracle that is a city. The thing that emerges when 3 million people live close enough together to depend on each other and irritate each other and occasionally, unexpectedly, help each other without being asked. You'll be in a different part of it soon, inside the gate instead of outside it, blue coat instead of the black one from Petticoat Lane, but still part of it, still London, still here. Let the sounds do what they do. Let the night air do what it does. Let the body rest that has been walking and carrying and managing its various imperfect arrangements for 8 years and is entitled, emphatically entitled, to one good night's sleep before the morning. The light from the gas lamp on the ceiling, the water stain, the map, the dog, let it go. Let it all recede into the background hum of the city that continues, that has always continued, that will continue long past the particular concerns of this particular man on this particular night. In 100 years, someone will stand on London Bridge and look at the river and not know that Tom Brennan ever stood there. Will not know Inkerman or the 3rd Regiment of Russian Rifles, or the fog of the 5th of November, or the particular grey of the Crimean Black Sea in autumn. Will know nothing of 9p per day, or the physics of a crutch on wet cobblestone, or the pension board office at Whitehall, or the woman on Petticoat Lane who mended a cuff so perfectly you can still barely find the seam. And that's all right. That's how it is supposed to work. You lived it. You were here. The city received you and didn't care and fed you when it could and failed you when it couldn't, and provided the extraordinary landscape of London in the 1860s as the context for the particular ordinary life of one man, which was your life, which was real, which was enough. Let your hands rest. Let the shoulder that carries the crutch rest. Let the stump rest. The real rest that comes when the prosthetic is off and the air is on it, and the grade goes to 0, and there is nothing but a warmth that is almost like a foot. Let the cot hold you. It's held you this long. You've earned this rest. The city breathes. Mint Street breathes. You breathe with it. Slower now. The gas lamp's orange light on the ceiling, gentler now, or your eyes adjusting, or the light itself dimming toward the small hours when the lamplighters make their second rounds. The map of nowhere. The dog running somewhere on the ceiling, always running, always 3 steps short of where he's going, which is fine, which is enough. Running is enough. Tomorrow the gate, tonight just this, just the breath, just the city, enormous and indifferent and alive. Just you, small in it, part of it, surviving in it, shaped by it in ways you won't fully know until you look back from someplace quieter. Just the warmth, just the rest. Good night.